This is episode 85 of our talk. And today I have a special guest who lives in Mexico, is a photographer, and made a book called Looking at Mexico, Mexico Looks Back. Janet Sternburg has written 8 successful books, taught at CalArts, and exhibited her photography in gallery shows in Los Angeles, New York, Berlin, Mexico, Seoul, Milan, and Bombay. Welcome, Janet. I'm so happy to have you as my guest. I'm honored to have you as my guest.
I am honored. I am honored. And as I said in the conversation leading up to your introduction, yours are the best set of questions, the material that I got preparatory to this interview that I've ever received. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Really touches me. Thank you. So you made a book, Looking at Mexico, and Mexico Looks Back. But it has a more profound meaning than just a simple title. That's what I feel. But could you tell us about that and why you chose the specific photo on the cover that is so multi-layered that you need to look at it for a long time before you actually start to see?
Those questions are beautifully related. First one, why the title? You say chose, quote unquote. Unlike most of my other books both of writing, because I'm also a writer of literary books and photography both, I've had to work and work at the right title. This title came to me like that, and I did not question it, unusual. And it goes to one of the most single important things about the book, and it's expressed really in the first sentence of my introduction. How can I, a gringa, meaning someone from the United States, foreign, living in Mexico, put forward a book so that it doesn't seem as though it's just me looking at Mexico? This is a kind of, oh, it's something many books do. They assume that their view, without ever saying it, is the view,
Mm-hmm.
one
Mm-hmm.
that it certainly is theirs, and perhaps even the one that is the one. Mine is not the one. It is not my Mexico. I needed to have, as I say in the introduction, a sense of reciprocity
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
between me and the photographs. And until I had that, I was not going to do the book. I've started taking photographs in Mexico a while ago as a surprise. We can talk about that later if you'd like. And develop my own way, now ways plural, of how I envision, embody, and image the sense of Mexico. But I just refuse to be the person that says, whatever that is, it belongs to me in some way. It
Mm-hmm.
was important to establish that this is also a book in which Mexico can look back. And that happens on several levels. Level one is how I got lucky. I discovered by good chance what I think of as a magnificent collaborator.
Mm-hmm.
I'll come back to that in a minute, but the book is simply, literally not just mine.
Yeah.
Number two is that the photos that I chose were, I chose them really very rigorously, which is my style anyway. In everything I do, I don't want to mess around with anything but the way it is that's right, at least by my standards. And that goes to your question of the cover.
Mm.
Initially, the publisher, and I've now published 3 photo books with Distance Verlag in Berlin, Initially, they and I came up with one idea for the cover, and it's not that cover. It's a cover, it's quite a good photograph. You know the book, so I can tell you that it's the one, I think it's the second one. It's you see the face of a young boy and he's looking up and there's a kind of plat, well, I won't try to describe it, but the point is it's lovely, it's oblique, but it is at some level literal.
Yeah.
And I did not want anything literal. I
Mhm.
did not want anything that had even the slightest sense of folkloric. I did not want straight ahead documentary, all of which I admire, but it's not what I want to do.
Mhm.
And so I had taken the photograph now on the cover as I walked down a street not long ago and discovered something that always attracts me, and that is abandoned cars.
Ah,
And I circle around the car, and ultimately this image, which is definitely not an obvious image. What it
no.
is a windshield and the hood of a car. And because the car is abandoned and been there for a while, there are the fronds, the leaves from the tree above falling on the hood. But it's more abstract than that, to use abstract in a very broad sense, in that it's not instantly readable. You are seeing the light coming through the window. You are seeing something that is transformational in the way that we can talk about, I'm quite sure, later, because you picked up on that in the book. And it doesn't fall into any of those obvious cliches. I
No.
love the photograph. I said, "What about this one?" They said, "Yes."
Yeah.
We were
Yeah.
off and running with, of course, the front cover having the title in English, done by a beautiful, a really good designer, I might add, based in Cologne, and the title in Spanish,
Mhm.
Mexican Spanish, in the
Mhm.
back, still on top of the photograph as it continues. And I say that lastly to emphasize that the book is completely bilingual,
Yeah.
English and Mexican
And Mexican
Spanish.
Spanish. Yeah.
Yeah, I worked with a poet in the United States who knows quite a lot about all things Mexican. And I did not want Castilian Spanish. I wanted the book to say what the title says.
Yeah. Yeah. And it does.
Good.
I've never been in Mexico. I want to go to Mexico. But it is as if it looks back at you. It does. It gives you insights in things you don't know, or that I don't know. I have to say it like that. Um, and the first time I received a copy and looked at the photo, I had to really like, what is this? First, I thought it is kind of a wall with a mirror, and then there's some, and then I saw, oh no, wait, because you can look through. And oh, wait, no, I can see that this is a seat or something. And it is so beautiful how this old car has transitioned into something, and you created art out of it, which makes it so endlessly beautiful.
Well, thank you. There is I think probably the second or first photograph. Hang on one second. I'm going to need to cough. The first photograph, no, second really, that I took in Mexico, this was 1998. So I started not as a kid.
No,
That photograph is also of an abandoned car, and it also lives in and with light, although it's more obviously a car. But I called that photograph way back then Splendor.
Mhm.
because for me, the splendor was the way that light and the photograph that I took transfigured a wreck into something of splendor.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes, that
Yeah.
is what I will. Also, your comment of what is it, and then your subsequent looking is exactly the way I want people to look at my work. Because for me, the question that makes me least happy is what is it?
Exactly.
Because if you have to answer directly, I feel it's a little bit, when people have in the past at least caught butterflies and they've pinned them to the wall.
Yeah.
I don't want to pin anything to
No.
any wall that
No.
says, this is what it is, this is what it's about. But I don't want to be obscure either. I would
Mm.
just like people to do what you did, which is to look and look again and look again in a state of interest, curiosity, and wonder, not trying to pin it down. And
Exactly.
lastly, um, you gave me something in the way that you saw it because you said something. I'm going to have to re-find it in my mind right now. It was about how, oh, of course, how the light in it, in effect, looks back at you,
Yeah.
which is not something I quite knew and didn't know really now because
Hmm.
there's so much we don't know, as I'm sure you know. Mm.
Exactly. But that's what you say at the end. And that I think that's the one of the most beautiful quotes. One of your gifts is to give that what you don't know.
Yes, yes,
That
it
is
really
so
is.
profound. Um,
How you see it is profound.
because we live in a world where we think that we know everything and we create pretty mediocre solutions for a lot of things. But there is so much wisdom that you don't actually see, but that you feel. Like how looking at Mexico, Mexico looks back, intuitively comes into you, you know it's okay. That's not knowledge. That's not knowing. That is a very intuitive knowing, which is different knowing than from learning from a book and having lists and pinning down and writing the cards next to a museum thing. What you give and what I experienced is, and maybe that's because I do that myself when I paint portraits, I have to I have to really start seeing and focus, and it expands my perception of what I see and how I see it, and I start to feel into it. And that is what I felt with this photo and with many photos of your from your book, to be honest.
Well, I'm so glad again. There's a kind of easy assumption that not knowing is a kind of ignorance. On the
Mm-hmm.
contrary, it's a kind of suspension. That wonderful phrase of Keats, which I'm about to misquote, but no irritable searching for. Well, that there's more to the phrase than that, but I've always liked that irritable searching, which I may even misquote, but I don't think so. It also speaks to something that in the previous book of mine, Book of Photography with Text, I've been walking, which is the year of COVID when I felt that I had to go out into the city at that point in Los Angeles and ultimately find traces of the human, although the human was by and large gone. At the end of that, I quote my introduction, I quote the Spanish poet Machado, who said, there is no path. You
Mm-hmm.
make the path
Yeah,
as you walk.
yeah, it's true.
And the other thing about not knowing is it leaves room for mystery,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it leaves room for asking questions. For example, in the book that precedes I've Been Walking, which was the first photo book I've done, also from Distance, called Overspilling World. I also wrote a piece in that book, and in it, one of the things I talk about is the mystery, and I'm quoting myself now, that no one talks about, particularly in photography, as to whether something is an accident or something is an intention.
Hmm.
And it's an interesting tension, I think.
It
There are
is.
many things that I think I have that surprised me. I look at the image; it was not an intention to have
Mm.
that there. But
Yeah.
if you look at many, many, many things that you do, in this case, photographs I take, or you discover a kind of through line. And in that through line, it cannot simply be an accident. There has to be intention at some level.
Yeah.
But that's interesting. It's an unknown that opens, I think, the door to better work. And I'm going to say one last thing, because as you can tell, all my answers have multiple answers. And
That's
that
great.
is, well, I'm glad you think so. It leads to a worldview, which I think that art making can and does. It is, and I'm just going to expand on that a little. So much of the world, and I'll speak to a certain extent to the United States, but much broader, sees the world, and this is among very intelligent people, as a positive attitude or a negative attitude.
Mm.
It's too easy.
It is. Yeah, I agree.
It's too easy. And
Yeah.
so, what I try to get at is the complexity of things without complicating it in a way that makes it difficult, but in a way that says, as the photos are, that the world is multi-layered
Yeah.
and it doesn't lend itself to
Yeah.
simple certainties or simple images. Again, without making it complex in the wrong way. I think the work is quite open, but the multi-layeredness is the more, as I write about in the
Hmm.
introduction to the
Hmm.
book we're talking about, the sense that the image has something more.
Yeah. Yeah.
So all that goes to what you've asked me.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, your book is about time, spirit, and transformation. And we talked already about it, but it's something that really speaks to me. Looking at the photos and how would you define time? Is that relative to you, looking back?
Oh, I don't think we can define time, either personally or otherwise.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm a great believer, for example, in the fact that there's no such thing as the present, because by the time the present, as we know it, reaches us even instantaneously, it's coming to us through light years.
Hmm.
So, what is it? You know, is it a present or is it something that is the past? Well, not
Hmm.
exactly.
Hmm.
We have these handles that make sense of the world, and they're good handles, useful ones, past, present, future, and we live by them. But in terms of defining it, I guess the word that comes to mind is fluid.
Yeah, and that is something that I can relate to. Um, as an artist, as a musician, you can be in that state that time becomes fluid.
Well, certainly that state, which of course is that one
And
that's
and
also has
also,
a name for it, flow, but I mean something else too. Yeah, go
yeah,
on. Sorry.
yeah, because you also talked about walking and how walking made you aware and deeply aware of what you were seeing around you. And that um, well, I can relate to that because I walk a lot because of that. Also because I did Julia Cameron's books, Walking in This World,
Mm,
etc. And it brings, well, me, it always gives idea. And then I am in a different time. So
that's the
that's
fluidity.
different than being in flow, but then I am in a different kind of time. Yeah.
And again, I think in any given instant in a
Mhm.
day, we are in different times.
Yeah.
There's the time of the moment when suddenly one can be ambushed by a
Mhm.
memory.
Mhm.
It's not something you're trying to recall, but the
Yeah.
synapses deliver it,
Yeah. No.
Are they delivering the past? Well, sort of, kinda. Are they delivering an interpretation of the past? More
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
are they delivering it as it impinges on the present? Is it offering something for the future? I think I'm going to diverge a little bit here, and this will either be to the point or not. But there's another book of mine that is not photography. It's called memoir, although that is not a word I like very much. Um, I always hear it as me, memoir, me, moi,
Yeah,
me,
yeah, yeah,
me.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
But it is a book about something in my family as it intersects with science, history, memory, ideas. And I will tell you very briefly what it is. But I could talk about that at some length, but I won't, but why it relates to time. Um, it's about something that happened in my family that's rather unusual. My mother, a second generation immigrant family, um, was one of six children, five young girls, one young boy. The boy was soon manifestly schizophrenic and
Mhm.
terribly dangerously ill. One of the sisters, 15 years later, she was always fragile, emotionally fragile. Some things happened that made her much more so, and she was in an intractable, terrible depression. So, with 15 years between them, they were each given and agreed to by my family a lobotomy. So, that's two
Oof.
lobotomies in my family. Two out of six, a third of my mother's family, however you want to look at it. And the book takes off from the place where I, as an adult, go, oh, how could this have happened?
Yeah.
One, yes. Two, I won't go on with that, but how this relates is that at some point in the book, my Uncle Benny, many years lobotomized, writes me a note. It's actually a get well note. I was sick. You can see from the writing, this is not a well person himself by a long shot. It's wobbly, whatever. And the last line is, I hope we will all be together at Diane's house. Well, looking back after all these years and rediscovering, I thought, how could Benny hope? Because damage to the frontal lobes, which
Mm.
is what happens, is damage to the human capacity to look to the future.
Yeah.
And theoretically, Benny could not hope. And in the book, and I always think in this sort of a book, the I is a character, so I always put a
Mhm.
quote around it, but it is me at the same
Mhm.
time. I try to find that out, and I speak with psychologists of memory and a number of other people as one part of the book to essentially answer the question, how could a man who should not be able to hope? How could a man who did not have a sense of the future have a sense of the future? Or so it seemed. And what he was talking about was that he hoped that as we had every year as a family, we would be together at a cousin's house for
Yeah.
Thanksgiving. And the psychologists I spoke with said no, he could not hope. He did not have a sense of the future. They just had no answer.
Mm.
My answer, and now we circle back to your question about what time means to me, and tell me what it means to you, is an idea that I developed that hope is the friend of the present, not of the future.
Yeah.
Although, well, that's too black and white, but the friend of the present. And that when Benny wrote that, it was not from the way that we ordinarily think of the future, of how we think of ourselves as central, our little selves, central to something that's going to happen in the
Mm.
future.
Mhm.
That because this had happened, this event in Benny's life, he was able to have a sense of a kind of group happening of which he was a part.
Yeah.
And that sense of group, not himself as an actor, was something that he could hope and say as a friend of the present to me. And to take that long story and circle back to it, what I'm getting at is I do think that so many of our ideas are kind of too cut and dry, that
Mhm.
the only way we can, and too categorical.
Yep.
The only way we can think of a future is in the future. The only way we can think of the self is as an actor in some point in time. And I think actually to answer this philosophically, which is the question you asked, it is philosophical, is that I think that we need, I don't want to be prescriptive, but we need to have more elastic, complex, and fluid sense of time, our place and our role in it, not necessarily as central actors.
Mhm.
I think I'll just stop there. It took a lot to get to that point, but you see what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And I agree because the time we have created is a very industrial form of time. It's like walking around with the card and you have to clock in and clock out. And that doesn't work like that. And our memories do not work like our brains do not work like that. Um, and I think that is the importance of being an artist because you can tap into that.
Exactly. There's another pernicious use of time
Mm.
in the, I mean, pernicious use, not time itself, which I fall into, which is just say things like, and this is very common, I've got to do more. I've got to do more. How much I have to do today. I'm overwhelmed by this. I mean, it's just a whole kind of squeezing
Yeah.
of time
Yeah.
into an obligation for oneself that if one does not fulfill, one is in effect bad. I mean, that's
Yeah.
an exaggerated way, but not that exaggerated.
Yeah.
And I think
But that is something that we were taught.
mhm,
That
yes,
is what we were taught, but that's not the truth.
no. And other cultures certainly do not live by that. I don't mean to glorify, aggrandize other cultures versus the West. There's, obviously a lot of latitude in there. But surely we have learned, and it really is antithetical to the creative process, we have learned to parcel time into
Yeah.
little units
Yeah.
of things that we must do.
Yeah.
And if we don't do, we're bad.
We're bad.
I know
Yeah.
that's wrong.
You didn't
I
do
know
what you were
I'll do
supposed to do.
too.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. We talked a little bit already about the walking part. And you write that finding that without a destination, I was more receptive to what was around me. So if you look at where we are now in this world, do you think there is a lack of that?
I really don't know because in some of your questions, you also asked about young people, and I'm
Yeah.
picking up and bringing that into this answer, you know, I really don't like to pontificate, I don't really know what it is for young
Mhm.
people now.
Mm.
I'm 81. I'm not young. I don't know. And I would be the first to say it. I don't have kids. I mean, I keep my eyes open. I try to know who Billie Eilish is, for example, and like her music, but I don't know
No.
whether kids are being damaged by not looking sufficiently, whether cell phones are causing our sense of openness and vision to atrophy. Perhaps so. Um, Funny that you talk about walking. I do love to walk, but I'm not at this point in life a serious walker. I'm going to use walking at the moment as a metaphor for
Mhm.
suspension,
Mhm.
the kind of walking that I'm talking about, for not having that goal
Yeah.
that forces one to have, like horses have blinders,
Mhm. Mhm.
go toward that goal, and those blinders prevent. Yesterday, I was walking along a street here I like very, very much. I was on the way to my gym class, and a couple of things happened, and they were really just little tiny things, and they're somewhat romantic things, which tends to happen sometimes in certain parts, at least of Mexico, not everywhere. Well, there was a guy, and he was on the sidewalk and not particularly well dressed, but playing the violin beautifully.
Mhm.
And then there was a woman coming toward me who said hello, and then I realized she was somebody from a store that I had been in before. And then I went and got a cup of coffee at a very unusual, really eccentric coffee house cum antique cafe with a little boy who only spoke Spanish, who kept handing me coasters for my coffee and saying pancake, pancake. So he was trying to
Mhm.
relate that in English. And I could go on, but I
Yeah.
won't.
No.
It was the world coming in. And it wasn't that I had taken a very long walk. I live in a town that's, its nickname is the town of fallen women and fallen men now too,
Okay.
because not in the obvious sense of the joke, but it's full of
Mhm.
cobblestones and places to stumble, which I've done in the past and which I try very hard not to do now.
Mhm.
And I spend a certain amount of time looking down as opposed to around.
Yeah.
I just don't, and I don't want to stride forward in total confidence, as I perhaps had more or less when I was younger. Scratch the word total in confidence. But the larger metaphor is the openness. I
Mhm.
even had a destination, but I was not preoccupied with other things. Delight was coming at me. I welcomed it, which doesn't mean that it always has to be delight. It can be many other things,
Yeah.
ugliness, despair, many things.
Yeah.
But I'm using it as the metaphor for being open
Yeah.
and a
And I
state that
love that. Yeah. Yeah.
wants to achieve, want not to achieve, bad word, that
Achieve is again.
wants to foster, to
Yeah.
encourage, to
Yeah.
nurture
Yeah.
those words.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah. It gives so much openness and time to breathe
And
when
I
you do
love
that.
to look. I
Yeah.
was a little girl. I was always going, look, 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 and I still do that.
Yeah.
And the greatest gift that I was given in childhood from another person was an aunt. I think I must have been about 9 or 10. And she once said to me, when I walk down the street with you, I see things I would not see.
Mhm.
And such a simple thing. And my mother loved art. This particular aunt loved words. Neither of them were people of education. They would have liked to have been. Circumstances didn't allow that to happen.
Mhm.
But they had tremendous sensitivity. And it was the first time I went without knowing it. And I remember it all these years. There has to be some way that I'm seeing that's different, that's
Yeah,
maybe mine.
yeah, yeah.
What a gift.
It is a gift. It is a gift,
Oh, yes.
definitely. I remember when I was painting something and someone looked with me when I was doing that and they said, I don't see that. So yeah, but I do. Look. And they said, yeah, you see more than I do. So yeah, but I have trained myself to see. And I think that everyone can do that because
I
when
do
you
too.
do that, you open up and you see more.
Yeah,
You get a broader perception. And that is wonderful because you also see opportunities for yourself and you enjoy things more. Um,
absolutely.
and you can be grateful for things you see because of their simple beauty, things that you didn't see before. So, like this afternoon, I did before we started. I had a walk, and I tend to have no AirPods in, no phone, nothing with me. I just want to be alone with nature. And there's this little stream, and I see the littlest bird ever, and he was bathing. So there was a little branch that made a pool for him, so he wouldn't get in the stream. And he was going on, and I just stood there, and I had like, this is so magnificent. You just have to stare at it and look at it. How this little bird, the smallest I ever saw, was just puddling around and bathing and enjoying himself, and then he was gone again. Those little things are so beautiful to see. I mean, you don't even have the time to take your phone or whatever to make a photo, because then before you have focused or found it, because it's so small, it's gone.
Well, I love your sense of the micro because, again, we tend to see a
Yep.
kind of view of what's in front of us.
Yeah.
But you were looking into something very small. And that's one of the advantages of looking, that scale
Yeah.
becomes open,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
open to you. There was something else I just wanted to say from what you said, the walking, the bird. There's such a lovely image that I think I just kind of stopped there. Um, yes, two things. When I started, I wanted to take a photograph. That was the, so to speak, moment when I was walking without a destination. I was here, but here was much less sophisticated than it is now. And the only camera that was available, because I didn't have one with me and planned this, was a throwaway, a disposable, a
Yeah.
single use.
You're right. That. Yeah.
Yeah. And it allowed me to see things differently, which was a great
Mm-hmm.
surprise. People don't usually use it that way, but because it doesn't have a depth of field,
Mm-hmm.
everything appears on the same plane. If you say it's okay not to have automatic focus, then you get rid of the conventional way of, I like this, it's sharp. Don't like that as much, it's blurry. You can't do that. You can't make those choices. And if you work with reflection, as I did for quite a while, and you do not like, you don't, well, you like blur. You don't necessarily have to have the world super sharp.
No.
You get a vision of the world that became very important to me for quite a long time, that destabilized. You didn't know when you looked at my photographs where I was, unlike a lot of wonderful photographers who work with reflection, Lee Friedlander, Eugene Ache. You don't know where I am. And everything interpenetrates
Mhm.
because of this flattening of
Yeah.
foreground and
Yeah.
background.
Yeah.
And so you don't know what is solid, you don't know what is fluid. Things create a boundary, borderless world, which I like very much,
Mhm.
although I don't always
Mhm.
do it any longer. But some people found that troubling. And there was a very interesting moment. I once had a show in which an architect looked at these photos big and was quite troubled by them because he couldn't establish his habitual sense of
Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
A
But I can
choreographer,
understand that
yes,
for an
but a
architect.
choreographer
Definitely.
looked at it and went, "Oh, I want to walk right into that."
Yeah.
And so they were very different ways of being in the world. And I can understand and to a certain large
Mhm.
extent sympathize with both. But the larger point of what you were saying is getting away from the habitual expectation,
Yeah.
which again is one of the things that closes us down.
Yeah.
And when I was working with the disposable that way, I got a big kick. I remember there were many occasions. The particular one I was just remembering was being at a B&B in Utah, in obviously the United States. And there were some people I didn't know, and one was, I think, a 17-year-old kid, give or take. And there was beautiful light in the room, and I was telling him a little bit about what I do. And then I asked him to walk with me to one of those glass-fronted cabinets that also had a wooden surface that had a lot of light on it. And I know that what he was expecting to see, what was inside the glass fronted cabinet. But I
Mhm.
asked him to look and look again, not with
Mhm.
anything fancy, not with some special lens, just his eyes. And suddenly he saw that the room behind him was in front of him, that the layers of light and angles were creating something, that everything was different when he
Yeah.
stopped expecting. And it was such a joy for me. He sort of
Yeah.
looked at me with this huge smile, like, oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
Mm. Yeah. That's beautiful. And you say you aim for simplicity, but your photos are very complex, and it is suggestion versus depiction.
Thank you. That's a perfect word. And it speaks to something else because, of course, simplicity is something that is not simple to necessarily achieve.
Mm.
As a writer, I remember saying about a particular book, Phantom Limb is its name, um, that I wanted the writing in it to be like a transparent stream
Yeah.
and that you could see the rocks under it, but you didn't have to stumble or stay there. It was just
Mhm.
this transparent stream. And it took me 10 years to achieve not just the writing, but also the idea behind what the whole book was
Yeah.
going for.
Yeah.
So simplicity is an artistic venture
Mhm.
as much as it is something simple.
Yeah.
That's different.
Well, maybe it is simplicity on the other end of complexity.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's stripping away what isn't essential.
Yeah.
It's discovering faults in oneself.
Yeah.
I used to be a much fancier writer when I was younger. I somehow thought, and I was good. And when I was writing poetry, I could get these wonderful textures and all kind of a thicker language, etc. This does not have to do with whether it's straight ahead or oblique, because poetry tends to be oblique. That's in its nature. But it was in the density of the language. And then I realized that I really didn't want to be doing that exactly. So then I studied for a while with a poet who was extremely simple in his language, simple to the point that it was like, oh, I don't know, like brushing one's teeth or something, just trying to get to that other place that was not beautiful language for
Mhm.
its own. Well,
Mhm.
nothing is wrong with beautiful language for its own sake. I think what was wrong with mine is there was a little element maybe of a kind of showing off.
Mhm.
I can do this. A kind of this is what I think poetry is. I'm not going to go on with that. I don't want to excoriate myself, but it is, and it's not simply about being democratic, although God knows the disposable, as someone wrote about my work, is as democratic as tool as one could wish for, because sort of anyone can work with it. It's not lenses out to here that, no. And even now, I'm very low tech. It's discovering who you are and how you want to say it.
Yeah,
And that sounds so simple, but it really, as you know, isn't at
it
all.
isn't at all.
And it is
No,
a matter of
no.
style, but it isn't only a matter of style. Style is a way of self expression. So you
Mhm.
have to kind of work toward, in my case, the simplicity that was right for me, that sometimes was embodied in these complicated images,
Yeah.
complex images, but they weren't complex for their own sake. They weren't complex for saying,
Mhm.
hey, look at me. They were complex for saying, this is a multi layered, mysterious world,
Yeah.
particularly those earlier ones.
Yeah.
So, simplicity, I'm trying to, I think, as they say in academic circles, of which I am adjacent, but not a
Mhm.
part, unpack the word, you know.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Let's go to your first collaboration with
This book,
Jose Alberto Romero Romano. Do I
it's
pronounce that well?
perfect. Yes, you couldn't have done it better. We're going to call him Alberto because that's
Alberto.
what I
Yeah.
called him. Although
Okay.
Jose, in certain areas, is most of his life is actually known as Joe. But I
Mhm.
sort of Jose Joe. But I just started calling him Alberto, and that is who he is in the book, and that is who
Mm.
he is in our
Yeah.
friendship.
Yeah. So he looks at photos differently than you do, which I like because it's a completely different input. It also sometimes places me off, like, oh, okay, this is really literally, but I see and feel something different in the photo. Um, and I know some artists who don't like their work to be seen differently than what they meant it to be. How was that experience for you, also collaborating for the very first time with someone?
Yeah, well, certainly years ago I worked in film and that meant lots of collaboration, whatever. Although I have to say, as time went on, I really discovered I just like to be alone, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. I am that classic version of an introvert, which is not somebody, I mean, I can be as social as anybody, not quite, but
Mm-hmm.
I love the definition that says the introvert is somebody who is drained by too much exposure with other people. And
Yeah.
the extrovert is somebody who is sustained and finds it inspiring.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of classic introvert that way. And so I really find my own company just fine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But first came this notion of I have a book of photographs from this period of time, but I don't want them to be a book. They're not good enough as my view of Mexico because I don't want my view of Mexico. So Alberto was recommended to my husband and me as a very skilled physical therapist, which he is. And I had made a small studio for myself where the most important thing, and I mentioned this in the coda of the book, was to have sheetrock on the wall. So,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever it's called, I don't know. And, it's the material that allows you to take little push pins and put
Yeah.
images
Yeah.
and move them around.
Yeah.
Loved it. And I had that on the wall. And Alberto would come by, and we liked each other. We talked a lot, one way or another, whether in treating me or afterward. We had things to say. And then he looked at the pictures and he would say things that were so insightful.
Mhm.
And they were insightful at the level of personal memory.
Yeah.
Oh, this reminds, or ideas of Mexico or whatever. And I don't know what got into me, because you cannot really consciously take a chance. You can't really consciously risk something. It becomes self-conscious at that point.
Mhm.
You just have to go for it. And I
Yeah.
said, would you work with me? Would you collaborate with me on this book?
Mhm.
And for all he knew, I could have been, some kind of flaky person who was just here. I don't know if flaky is a word in the Netherlands, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Somebody who would not follow through.
Yeah.
And for all I knew, what I was seeing in him might not really have been fully what it was.
Mhm.
But I could sense that if you think, and I use the image of the prism in the coda, of something that is not descriptive, is in no way a caption, is in no way illustrative, but a view that
Yeah.
expands.
Yeah.
That's what I felt was possible with the two of us. It was one of the richest, best experiences, artistic experiences of my life. And I've had a lot of very, very high ones, high in the sense of,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this was so special. And just to cut to the moment that he and his wife and his then 5-year-old son came over, and I gave them the book because he hadn't seen it up until that point. He had certainly seen it in stages because I wanted his collaboration in everything,
Mhm.
everything. I'll come back to that, more about that in a minute. But to give them the actual artifact. And his wife said to me, thank you, because you've shown me parts of my husband I did not know existed. And that part was the poet in him.
Wow.
And it's very strong. I mean, there is,
That's
he said,
beautiful. Yeah.
oh, I know. And a little bit of the philosopher too, although I don't mean that in the most academic sense, but he's somebody who likes to think.
Mhm.
And as somebody who every day has a family and work and a physical therapist, that side comes out, but only if he's with people that sort of ask it to come out. And in this case, I was really asking.
Yeah. Yeah.
it to
Yeah.
come
Yeah. Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
enjoyed his comments. Yeah. I really
period,
did.
periodically, he would say things like, what was it? Something, this may be a misquote, Alberto, forgive me. Silence in her brain like a breath. I mean, just like, oh, where'd that
Mhm.
come from? You with me? And
Yeah.
so it ended up because my first training, and I don't, first love really is a much better way of saying it. First leaning is toward poetry. I do have some skills in that area. So first we began, and I would, computer type out what he would. I showed a bunch of photographs. I said, choose one, just one that speaks to you, speak to me. And he would talk about it, and I someone said, well, why didn't you record it? And it never occurred to me. It just didn't occur to me. I just
Mhm.
wanted it to be me taking it down and responding and questions, whatever. And then after that, I winnowed it because there's a lot of words and big file of words. And I wanted something very concise. I didn't want to poeticize it. I don't know, again, if that's a distinction that if your
Mhm.
listeners and viewers are in the Netherlands, that's a highly English way of saying it.
Mhm.
I didn't want it to be, oh boy, this is like poetry, gee whiz. I didn't want it.
Mhm.
I wanted plain speaking, but to retain the qualities.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of shaping and cutting, but then I had to ask him if this was all right and if this was expressive of his words. And sometimes it wasn't. And he prevailed on that. I changed it or cut things out. So the collaboration was an honest one.
Yeah.
I'm going like this because it was going back and forth
Yeah.
and forth and back. I
Yeah.
just loved it. I don't think I'd love it with everybody. I mean, right now in the United States, there's an awful lot of discussion about collaboration. Words like community, a wonderful word,
Mm,
but much overused. You know, the artist as the center, not center, but the part of.
yeah.
I'm not going to go out and look for that again. I mean, I'm going to look for something, if it comes to me, the way Alberto and I did together,
Mm,
and say, isn't that great? And then bringing in the family, you know, the son who looked at the photographs, and then the son, I don't think I say this in the introduction, but one day, or at the end even, but one day Alberto came over with, I think, Hero, his son, Hieronimo, with a photograph that he had taken, and his son had said, because he'd seen a lot of mine, I'd sent them back home with Jose and Alberto. He said, "This is a Janet photograph," and it was.
wow.
I know.
Wow. Then he had a great sense. Yeah.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
like his dad
Yeah.
was.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Kids
have
can be
no
very
problem.
sensitive
No
in that.
problem with the question about
No,
not liking people to see the work differently. This was
no.
just what I wanted.
Yeah.
I didn't want someone to look at the work and go, and you know, I just want to come back, but a lot of books, including my first book of photography, have what I call a lot of apparatus.
Mm-hmm.
People writing essays about it. I was thrilled. Wim
Mm-hmm.
Wenders, who I'm sure you know,
Yeah.
I know his work, and I hadn't known him personally, but I had his email and I sent him work and said, "Could you possibly write something?" And he wrote something so magnificent for the book. So, I mean, it was a 4-page prose poem, as did a few other people who are well known and kind of stamp of authority, of approval, but also wrote beautifully. With this book, even though the publisher would have wanted me to, and I tried to accommodate him, ultimately I didn't want another voice.
Mm,
I wanted to
mm-hmm.
foreground the collaboration. I didn't
Yeah.
want an interpretive view of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the
And
answer.
it breathes through the whole book that this was a intuitive collaboration again, just as the title was an intuitive title that
Tell me what you
needed to
mean by
be.
intuitive. I want to know what you mean by intuitive. That's such an interesting word.
Um, the title came to you and you knew it was all right. It had to be like that. He saw photos and he talked about it and you felt instantly he needs to say things about the photo and I want to collaborate with him. You know that deep inside.
Well, I think that there's a missing word in what you've said, and the word is trust.
Of course,
Because,
of
yes, of
course,
course. I think
of
intuition.
course, you need trust. I mean, before you start
Intuition is a
collaborating with
process.
someone on your work, letting him
No,
saying,
trusting. No, trusting in intuition itself,
oh
because
yeah,
intuition,
definitely, yeah,
I think, is the product
yeah,
of a lot. It is not a flash out of nowhere. And the example I give is the personal one. When I was first going out with my husband, we went to Europe and we somehow had made an error. We did not have a place to stay that night. Uh, Everything was booked. We were in a car, but nothing. And we found one place, and they said, if you can get here in 5 minutes, we'll hold a place for you. And we were not right there. Maybe it was 10 minutes, but the name of the place was Les Roches Blancs, the White Rocks. And my husband said, it wasn't my husband, my boyfriend said, look at the map. And I said, no, we only have 5 minutes. Go to the right. You look at the map. I said, no. He said, I don't trust intuition or something of that sort. Well, what it was a moment of realizing that if they called it white rocks, blanche, that it had to be overlooking something where the rocks
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
essential.
Yeah.
On the right was the ocean and rocks. On the left was the town. Go right.
Yeah.
So it was an instant deduction, induction, who knows which one it was, but it was based on a bunch of stuff that gets called intuition.
Yeah.
But it's really life making itself known to what you know. And then
exactly. And we have this all the time. But as you say, we not always trust it. And we should.
Mm-hmm.
We should.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, it's not as, you know, Pacha, my boyfriend, then husband of many years now, but he wouldn't trust it. And that's very common. Look at the map.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's
that,
why
that is very common.
Word.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trust.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the comments on the photo he wrote with a tree and a mask. That's the leaves, and you see the mask in it. And he writes, a mask is always transformation. Transcendence arises by means of the mask. All Mexicans need to feel transformation inside and outside. And I had like, how do you see the Western world in this respect? Do you think most wear masks to not be seen as they are?
Mm-hmm.
And what does that say about us in the Western world? Is that a way Mexico looks back at us?
Absolutely. First, can I just tell you how that photograph came about? Because it's it's a nice story. We have had a house here for 28 years, but it was a second house while we had jobs and whatever in the United States. And it was only 2 years ago that we decided to stay and really make this our first home. All those 28 years, there was somebody who worked with us as housekeeper, as all-purpose everything. First a mother and then a daughter. The daughter is Christina, and it's she who I'm going to talk about. When the mother, Estefana, died, Christina was in great despair. And then little by little, she began to dance with a troupe, of which there are many such in our town, and they're all called Los Locos, the crazy ones. And these are not trained dancers. They go as groups. Hers is called Crazy Boys with K and Z, Crazy Boys. And they dance together in a town that they choose. And it's a kind of this sort of dancing, you know, and they collect money for charity. For somebody who would need. It's a much better way of putting it. Well, one day she showed me one of the masks that she had made for this dancing troupe. Christina, you're an artist. It was fabulous. It had, well, you've seen it in the photograph.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, it's beautiful.
It's a thing. It's not a mask, a Halloween mask. No, it's made and complex and. And we said, we went into the garden together behind the house. And I just said, just walk and move and do. And I took all these photos of her. And that was one of the photographs. She had just kind of crouched down among the grasses in this mask. And suddenly she was mythic. She wasn't this person I'm describing. She was this mythic person in the middle, or mythic something in the middle of nature. And that was obviously the transformation. Now, down the street from our house, there is a mask museum, because the masks made in Mexico are at least of that ilk, if not even more fabulous. From where I'm sitting, if you could look that away, you would see a jaguar mask, rather small, but quite powerful. It is part of the culture. It has nothing to do with Halloween disguise. It has nothing to do with the metaphor of I don't want you to see me, so I will be masked. It has nothing to do with I'm getting old. I want to pretend I'm not. I'm going to put a mask of makeup on. Nothing to do with any of that.
No.
It has to do with when I put it on. And here I'm going to turn to another photo in the book. It's the man in the mask. He's got blue or green feathers all around his head.
Yeah.
And coming from the head, almost like it's coming from the
That is
forehead.
the crocodile.
Crocodile mouth, and then going all the way down and over to here.
Yeah.
I almost did not use that photograph. I thought it might be, God forbid, folkloric. But it is his expression, number one, which is a wary expression. Who are you? Why are you taking this picture?
The way he looks through like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm.
And then it is what Alberto said. This man could be, he's not a professional dancer. He could be a taxi driver.
A taxi driver.
Puts it on, which by the way, my father was, which I think explains some of my love for cars, old abandoned cars, but that's an aside, semi-aside. But when he puts this on, he has power and something speaks through him.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is the kind of transfiguration. It often is the powerless to the powerful. It is often toward the ceremonial, the ritual. In many ways, it has its own individuation in it. Not everybody, like Christina has her mask. She's made other masks. You don't go to a store and buy your mask, in other words.
You create.
And I asked her to show me how she makes it. And she saves up newspapers. Mm-hmm. And then she puts over her head a handmade, again, like wire hangers, but a grid. And then she takes the newspapers, soaks them, puts them over into this grid so that it becomes a kind of papier-mâché, puts the grid away and molds it. Now, you don't get more handmade than that. The other examples, the kinds you go to the store, the kind of makeup you put on, it's absolutely not handmade. It's the opposite. So they're both disguises of sorts, but toward radically different purposes. Yeah. And yes, I do think we have lost that other purpose that allows us to enter into something that makes us more than ourselves. Yeah. There's an awful lot I have to learn from Mexico, and boy, have I learned a lot being here.
A huge lot. And my last question is also about the generosity of the Mexican people. That really touched me. That story of you passed, of your past cousin. He passed away, and you were walking in the street with your head down, and then the woman you accidentally bumped into was kind and just hugged you. And you talk about the general.
No, Mario, my cousin died. I don't know how I said that, and I didn't even know the Spanish.
No,
I think I said it wrong.
Yeah, but she just, Was that a kind of welcome back into the arms of Mexico?
Well, that's a beautiful way of thinking about it. You know, I do not want to fall into cliches. God forbid. We all know about many other parts of Mexico. We know about the cartel. We know about all kinds of things.
Yeah.
But generosity is there. I would say not a day goes by that I do not say to somebody, "Oh, muchas gracias. Usted es muy amable. Thank you. You are so kind." Yeah. There is a kindness built into the culture. It's really why I think I really want to be here and stay here. It isn't to say there isn't such generosity in the United States. Of course there is. And when my husband for many years, was president of college. Bear with me, I'm coming to a point here. It sounds like it's a digression. It's not. And so we lived in the house that the school provided. And it was one of those rather typical Los Angeles houses in that it stood alone.
Mm.
You know, I mean, one family land around it. I wouldn't have gates, but all the others had gates, you know, that kind of life.
Yeah.
When the time came for him to step down after 29 years, we could have moved anywhere for a number of reasons that are not germane. I wanted to move to a particular building in Little Tokyo in Los Angeles, where almost everybody in the building was Japanese, an apartment building. And part of it was because I didn't want to be in the haute bourgeoisie of the hills and the money and all of that stuff. I wanted to be in another culture again that time. I still had the house in Mexico. We weren't living here. And I found such generosity there.
Yeah.
There was somebody whose mother became terribly ill, and we got together as a group, and we bought her a futon so that she could sleep in the same room. I mean, there was just great generosity.
Yeah.
So whether it's cultural, whether it's geographical, I don't know. But here in Mexico, there are many fewer barriers between self and other.
Mm.
Time when I walk down the street and, you know, most people will say always, I forget sometimes, and then I go, wait a minute, buenos dias before a conversation, or buenas tardes, good afternoon, or buenas noches. It's just a courteous part of life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you say it, you make eye contact. You don't look away.
No.
And then because the taxi cabs here are very small, and because our house is on a very high hill, and because I'm getting older, sometimes I have trouble getting out of a taxi, and the driver will come around and give
Help
me
you.
a hand.
Yeah.
Usted es muy amable, muchas gracias, señor. It's just again and again. And about 4 months ago, my husband fell and he broke his femur in 3 places. Big bad thing to happen. And people just came forward.
Mm.
Gringos who live here, Mexicans here, were here when the ambulance brought him back, were there to go to the store and get money for me, food. Yes, it happens in small towns in America. I'm sure it happens in the Netherlands. It just feels intrinsic here, not special.
Exactly. And I think when I see here, it is when something happens, and I know because that happened to me, but people are in kind of a shock, and they're there for you, and they are here, and then when that's gone, their lives go on. And I have a few that I still talk with, and they ask me, how are you doing? How are things going? Can we do something? One particularly, a couple neighbors. I have friends in Amsterdam. But I also see people like, ooh, it's scary. I hope she's doing well, but we don't want to get involved in emotions or anything. And what came to me was that I just deeply felt something when I read that you were, walking there kind of lost, pondering about your cousin just passing, and you bump into someone strange and you say that, and she just hugs you and takes care of you for that moment. That is something special to me. Yeah.
It is very special. I will tell you, and since you said it, I don't think you'll take this askance, but what you were describing, I felt in the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm.
And I've only been there once, so I'm generalizing, but people's eyes did not meet me in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that people kind of stood in front of me, just in general, whatever, and didn't necessarily move, that fluidity that I
Yeah.
feel here.
Yeah.
So you're expressing it in the way that I'm talking about it here. And many people I know just adore your country. I mean, so many people in the United States just think, oh, Amsterdam,
Oh, yeah,
Amsterdam.
but they come for one reason, to Amsterdam.
Well, it's a number of reasons in the past, but probably
Mhm.
one, yeah, whatever. But they
Mm.
do much, and it's beautiful. But there was something that I find here that I've always kind of contrasted in my mind with there. And you've done it as well. So otherwise, I never would have said that. But yeah, I did
Yeah,
feel it. A
yeah.
closing in. And, I don't want to romanticize Mexico. And I'm not in a tourist, well, I am in a town that it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And in the
Mhm.
weekends, I don't go down much to the center because it's filled with tourists. But it's not fundamentally that. And it's not fundamentally the entire, it's a small city now since the time I started going there. So I don't mean again to say, oh, this is beautiful little town versus tourists, whatever, whatever. No, I keep trying to make sure I'm not saying it in a generalizable way. I
Mhm.
would
Mhm.
generalize it's here.
Yeah,
What I'm talking about is here,
yeah.
part of the culture.
Mhm. And that's what I feel. It's part of the culture. And I think whatever is going on, we know about things that happen and blah, blah, blah. But there's also a culture that has so much wisdom. And I know because I read the Four Agreements, and that's about a Toltec wisdom.
Yes, yes.
Um, and so, yeah, there is so much ancient wisdom that I think we should listen to and learn from.
Well, you're wonderful and you're right. And it's hard for us because it is not native to us.
Mm.
Uh, but my, I'm just thinking about a conversation where someone I know said to a Mexican, someone from the United States to a Mexican, you have often such terrible governments. There's so much corruption here. There is so much, just collusion, government, church, drugs, etc.
Mm-mm.
How do you deal with that? How do you think about it? And the answer was, and I think it's a good answer, is that we make a distinction between our culture and our government.
Yeah.
Our culture is deep, is
Mm.
very deep, and it sustains us.
Yeah. 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 And that is one of the most beautiful things you can do, because the culture is there and was there for centuries.
And then
And the
it was not.
governments were also
Yes,
influenced by the Western society.
absolutely. I
And
remember
that's why you have so much
oh,
corruption and
yeah,
stuff like that.
I worked for a while at a very big foundation day job in the United States, and a previous president, Salinas, who was found to be terribly corrupt, but when he first came in, he was considered, kind of the great whatever. And someone at this foundation said, well, he went to Harvard Business School. I didn't say anything to the person, but I thought, oops, no, no,
Mm.
no, no. This is not a way of saying that he's a good person.
No.
And this is foolish. This is wrong.
Yeah.
And he turned out really not to be good at all. But then again, so too did some of the native Mexicans, so
Yeah.
governmental people.
Yeah.
And who knows what influenced what. But we do have this tendency to want to see, you know, if you come from what is considered the more progressive West, you will somehow be morally better. And I used to think, all this corruption in Mexico, this is many years ago, this is so
Mm.
naive. And gee, it's not like that in the United States. Idiot, of course, it's just worse in the United States because it's more, to use your word, masked by large corporations, et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera. I
Yeah.
mean, what's wrong with us as a species is greed, and greed does not belong to any one country or any
Yeah.
one nationality. And here I am pontificating. But
Yeah.
a culture that sustains, you know, I mean, and this culture here in Mexico has been so wounded by the conquest
Mhm.
and has lost so much land to the United States, separate issue entirely.
Mhm.
I mean, separate, you know, the
Yeah.
Spanish came, you
Yeah.
know, all that. And there's great reason for grievance and loss of culture. I'll never forget, I was going to Chiapas, and I wanted, of course, to see Mayan culture, but the conventional wisdom of that is that so much of it was wiped out by the Spanish
Yeah.
and they became impoverished, whatever, whatever. Well, I have a Mexican friend with a marvelous living room full of books, and I would go over there and read before I left. And I discovered that really that isn't the case at all. And how people could think otherwise, I do not know, because you get there and everything is syncretic. You look at a cross,
Mhm.
and there'll be maize corn wound around the cross, to give a
Mm.
very obvious example. The
Mm.
Mayans didn't lose their culture.
No,
They
they
just,
didn't.
no, it
No.
is very alive and very well
Yeah.
and incorporated some things, but the myths that we think about, you know, no, there was this great culture and then it was lost.
Mm.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
no.
Yeah. It's a complex thing, and it forms people in their brain, but it's a shame. But anyway, where can people buy your book
Oh,
when it comes
well,
out?
okay. Yeah, it's out now.
It's
It's
out.
been
Yeah.
published, this book. Yes, it was published in Europe a couple of months ago.
Mhm.
And I know that I saw it. I didn't do a complete look. But for example, it was on Amazon Belgium, for example. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
so
Yeah.
there's that. One really easy way is to go to the website, if you're in Europe, of my publisher.
Yeah.
And that is Distanz, Distanz, and put the name of the book in or my name. And you will see, certainly with this book, looking at Mexico, Mexico
Mhm.
looks back, you can order it on their site.
Mm.
There are many, many, many reasons to dislike Amazon. However, it does make book buying awfully easy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you cannot deny that. And I'm not,
That's true.
I do
I mean, you are available then all over the world if they do it
all
well.
over
If your
the world.
publisher does it well, then you're
Very,
available all
very,
over the world. Yeah.
yes, it took a while, if anyone is listening, and I hope they are in the United States, for the books to reach the United States.
Mm.
Literally shipping. I mean, literally,
Yeah.
at which
Yeah.
point they were available for distribution. And now the book is on Amazon here in the United States. You can buy it, you can get it. A friend of mine wrote me today something that just I just couldn't believe it. She said at times it moved her to tears.
Mm.
I think, you know, it's the tears of life. I mean, not the tears of sadness and
Yeah.
or beauty, you know.
Yeah.
So it is now gettable
Yeah.
on the publisher's site and on any Amazon.
No,
So
that's
that
wonderful.
you can buy that book. And as you mentioned, there are quite a few other books of mine.
Yeah.
So the thing you need to remember, anybody watching this, is how to spell my name. Everyone gets it wrong. The last name is Stern, Stern,
Yep.
Bur.
Yeah. And
And
not
as you
with
know
an
that,
E.
will
Yeah.
not get the other one. The other one spells it differently. is a swamp biologist. I'm sure she does great work. It's not me. As soon as you know it's B-U-R-G, Janet
Yeah.
Sternburg,
Yeah.
then you can Google and a whole bunch of stuff pops up. You can put it into Amazon, the books I've been mentioning here tonight, today. They're all there. I have a website for photography, and I'm not going to try to get people to remember this. I'll tell it, but it'll be there if you Google me. But it's janetsternburgphoto.com, all one word.
I will
And I
put
have,
that all in the show notes.
oh, that's lovely. And I also have a website for my books, literary
Great.
books rather.
Yeah.
And that is, not unsurprisingly, janetsternburg.com. So
Great.
I'm visible. I have an Instagram account, which I use as a kind of sketchbook. I really love it. I don't do it for this is the dog, this is the whatever. I do it when I find an image that interests me, and then I'll put it on and I'll see what kind of a response I get, and I'll think about it, and kind of enters the public sphere. So
Great.
now there's a lot of my images on Instagram.
Good that I know, because then I can tag you in.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Then I can tag you in when I place this video, a part of it, a snippet, on my Instagram account.
Oh, do it. Well, let's, we could be friends on Facebook. I
Yep.
do use it. We could follow each other on Instagram. And now I am speaking directly to you. Karen, is that how you say your name? A friend from Sweden is Karen. Yes, Karen.
Karen, yeah, it's okay.
But I'm also saying it to anybody else who's interested in connecting in various ways.
Oh, I definitely am. Yeah.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this lovely, lovely conversation.
Well, you made me think. I don't know about you. I have to think I could make a guess. I like to think. I don't like canned answers. I don't like canned questions. And I don't do well with them. But in a situation of being asked to think about things with a receptive, interested, responsive person, oh, that's the best.
Great. Thank you so much. I love to have you.
Okay,